Those people can tune in. So people can tune in later. And yeah, and good afternoon and welcome back to our Lunch and Learn series. We haven't done one in a month or so, since before May because of Affordable Housing Week. It was just a lot to do. We had lots and lots of great panels that week. So if you engaged with us during Affordable Housing Week, thank you so much again. 19 events over about 5 days. So it was lots of great conversations about the intersection of housing and other sectors like transportation, public health, social justice, education, and those kinds of things. So yeah, really thankful for everybody showing up for that and coming back for Lunch and Learns, because the stuff doesn't stop. We're always going. And if you're interested in learning anything about what we did over Affordable Housing Week, you can visit our website. You can also go to our YouTube channel. All of the 6 panels, plus a couple more other virtual things we did. Everything that we did virtual over that week is posted there for you to watch. And so for today's Lunch and Learn, I'm really excited to have Sierra here. We're going to focus on climate policy and equity for frontline communities. And Sierra Suafoa-McClain from Front and Centered is joining us. Front and Centered is a coalition of communities of color working together at the intersection of equity, environment, and climate justice. It's a really, really cool organization. They do it across the state. And today we're going to learn about the work of Front and Centered, how they support communities, and what state legislation has been passed to address climate justice specifically. And right before I formally introduce our presenter, let me briefly introduce myself and the consortium. If you don't already know me, my name is Casey Twiggs. I'm the membership coordinator for the Affordable Housing Consortium, and I am your host. The consortium is a nonprofit membership-based organization that supports the expansion of affordable housing throughout Pierce County. One way that we do this is by hosting Lunch and Learn, special meetings, collecting data to share with the public, and as well as advocating for local policy at the state and local level for funding that will create more affordable housing. And we also work to bolster the work of our members. So altogether, we have about 70 members ranging from affordable housing developers, financiers, construction companies, architects, consultants, you name it, we probably got it in there, and individuals as well. Individuals just dedicated to affordable housing. And so with that, I'm going to introduce our presenter today. Sierra is an environmental justice advocate and movement lawyer. After graduating from Vermont Law School, Sierra returned to Tacoma in 2022 to continue the civil rights and environmental justice work they had begun as a youth growing up here in Tacoma. Sierra and their family draw roots from America Samoa, which drives their passion to work with Pacific Island communities and other indigenous communities, working towards just and sustainable futures. Currently, Sierra is the program engagement lead with Front and Centered, where they enjoy getting to work with frontline communities across the state. And we're really excited to have you with us. Excited for a great presentation and discussion. And just a couple of housekeeping. We've got such a small group today. If you've got some questions along the way, Sierra's got a presentation. If you've got questions along the way, Sierra, are you okay if people raise their hand and want to chat or have a question in the middle, or would you prefer them to hold questions?
No, definitely. Feel free to unmute and stop me and ask a question. That sounds great.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, feel free to interrupt us, unmute, whatever. It's just such a small group that's totally fine with me today. So yeah, I'm gonna pass it along to you, Sierra.
Yay! Thank you so much, Casey, and everyone for being here. Like you all identified, it is noon, it is lunchtime, and people, it is sunny. So I'm excited to be here today. Thank y'all for being here. I'll share my screen so I can share this presentation. Oop, slideshow. And can I just get a thumbs up from like Casey or someone if you can see my screen?
That looks great.
Okay, yeah. Thank you. Okay, so like Casey introduced, My name is Sierra Suafoa-McClain. I am the program engagement lead with Front and Centered, which Casey mentioned is a coalition of organizations across Washington state. We became a 501c3 in like 2017, but before then, several groups had been organizing with each other in solidarity since like 2013, 2014. So really grassroots origins that just kind of continued to grow as more and more grassroots and community-based orgs wanted to join this coalition, which eventually turned us into a 501c3. We have a 501c4 now as well, just transition voters. So that's still in development. So yeah, just a growing coalition. It's really exciting. It's all communities of color, low-income communities, frontline communities of all sorts, many intersections. It's a great org. So thank you so much for inviting us here today. Just to kind of demonstrate the work that we do, because we are all working towards a just transition together, is this really helpful like diagram from movement generation, if you're familiar. But they have this thing of this middle circle about what is politically realistic. And Front and Centered's work is often a duality of this. So not only are we trying to expose and prevent, expose and oppose, to use the slides verbiage, we're exposing false hopes, false solutions, things that are not working, that are exacerbating climate crisis, that are exacerbating housing inaffordability, and all of those things. So we're exposing them, we're opposing them to prevent them being codified or to get so that those things don't get through the legislature. And at the same time, we are continuing to create what we really need. So that is our work with our community members. Those are work with our community-based organizations and all of our members who are really working from the community up to build legislation, to build ideas and solutions that can help better make the world a better place and include everyone in that process, because everyone has a lived experience. So it is a lot of work to expose, oppose, codify, and create. But our hope is that one day, as we keep doing this work, we will shift what is politically realistic to what we really need, and hopefully leave the false hopes behind, in the past. So just a really quick summary of how Front and Centered kind of works and our theory of change. Getting into kind of how we got into like land use and growth management work. It started really in 2020 when we started to collaborate with FutureWise, which is another really big organization here. And they really just reached out, I think, to a lot of our leadership and wanting to bring the coalition into this space. And they were the ones who really kind of sparked that thing of like comprehensive planning can be a really big place for advocacy. So that's where our journey really began. And that was really an exploration into adding like climate and environmental justice into the Growth Management Act. So in 2022, we pushed a bill that would do just that, climate in the Growth Management Act. It did not pass, but what we did get was a directive from the legislature to the Department of Commerce with funding to create guidance for local jurisdictions to actually do this climate planning. So while the legislature wasn't quite convinced that we were ready at that time to take like climate into the GMA at that very point, I do think that they made a smart decision of like, this is coming down the pipeline. Climate justice clearly is very important. The impacts of climate crisis are continuously growing in this state, and comprehensive plans are a big part of that and how we can address those issues. So I do think they made a forward choice. And I will talk a little bit more about like that guidance and how Front and Centered was involved in just a couple moments. So that was 2022. Then in 2023 was really like a big year for us. So this is when House Bill 1181, which is climate in the GMA, was pushed, as well as House Bill 5651, which would have added environmental justice to the GMA. So both bills kind of ran concurrently. Front and Centered, we wrote House Bill 5651, full transparency, I wrote 5651. House Bill 1181, we supported. We worked very closely with that group so that they could push it, because it was like the second or third year that that bill was being pushed. And so 1181 ended up like passing. It went through. House Bill 5651 did not pass. It died. I think we were one vote short from going to the floor. So we were really close, and it was a really good fight. Again, I think the legislature was like, let's go with this bill that we're already familiar with. we know that climate is important. It mentions environmental justice in that bill. Let's just see how this plays out before we start adding like more and more changes. And to contextualize this, there was also like housing changes that were added. So there was again, just lots of changes, and they wanted more time. So that was 2023. I do see that there's 2 chats, so I'm going to pause. Yes, FutureWise does do great work. Thank you for sharing that chat, Casey. I appreciate it. So House Bill 1181. This is like kind of the nitty gritty. And Casey mentioned I am a lawyer, but I'm not like a scientist. So I will share these things. This is information directly from the bill and from Commerce. But I just wanted to put that out there that while I've worked a lot of time on this, I'm not an official scientist. So I can only speak to some things. So there are 2 parts to 1181. There's the resiliency sub-element and the greenhouse gas reduction sub-element. They both mention environmental justice. They both mention it kind of as like a co-benefit, I would say, of like the real goal of these elements. So the idea is kind of both resilience and greenhouse gas reduction will, of course, benefit all residents of Washington state and probably have impacts beyond that. So that's kind of the driving force of like climate justice, of course, applies to everyone, but this bill doesn't quite center frontline communities. I think the way that we were pitching in 56-51. Still quite a very necessary bill. We're super happy it passed. Just always flagging that there's more work to be done, of course. So that's kind of 1181. I can break down further if people would like what is really required in the sub-elements, but like I said, I only have a limited expertise. So happy to answer questions on 1181 to what I can, but just pitching those out. The other piece of 1181 is that the 2 sub-elements don't equally apply across the state. So the resiliency sub-element is mandatory for all fully planning counties and is encouraged, of course, for all of the cities and counties that are planning voluntarily as well. The greenhouse gas reduction sub-element, alternatively, is only applicable to 11 counties, which are on the slide. So that is really interesting. Pierce County is one of those. And I believe Pierce County is kind of, from what I understand, a little bit like ahead of the ball. I haven't super closely been following the GMA work that has been done, but from what I've seen, there's been like really interesting engagement plans and stuff. So I'm at least excited to learn a lot more about that piece as well.
Yeah, I would say, Sierra, specifically in Tacoma, there's been a lot of the plans, the Home in Tacoma plan, just specifically around housing. There's a lot of tree stuff in there too. So there's a lot of climate stuff interacting with development stuff going on in our plans. And yeah, they just had I think they're having a workshop tonight about the City of Tacoma comprehensive plan. So if anybody's interested in that, definitely they've got a couple of more workshops going on until, I don't know, a couple weeks from now. But yeah,
I think
there is a lot going on, lots of opportunities to engage.
Yeah, and I think you're right, Casey. Tonight's, I believe, is virtual, and then there's a couple that are also like in person too. So yeah, lots of opportunity to engage. I definitely, as I was looking around this morning, was like, oh, I should sign up for some of these. This sounds really fun. So yeah, so that's 1181. It has these 2 sub-elements. These are the key things that planners and the jurisdictions will have to draft. And I believe this is it's a new element. So it is its own, I'm just flagging that because I'll explain a little bit on the next slide, but it is its own element. It's not necessarily integrated into other pieces. There was, I believe, some language that got added to maybe the transportation element in 1181 or through 1181, but not totally sure on that piece. But that's kind of that. 56-51, alternatively, again, this was the one that Front Centered was pushing. It would do 2 things. So we were pushing really to add an environmental justice goal. So that goal would have, directed jurisdictions to develop and apply fair land use and environmental policies based on respect and justice for all people. And I think that's the direct language from the bill. But we thought a goal would be nice because the GMA goals, they're all very aspirational, but it's just always good to have a new goal. Alternatively, we also wanted to add an EJ element. So similar to 1181, that would have been a new element, a new piece of a comp plan, and that would have required looking cumulatively at the impacts of comprehensive plans to fully understand how they impact the health of overburdened communities and vulnerable populations. The breakdown of that is really into like identifying the overburdened communities and the vulnerable populations within the planning jurisdictions, and then like intentionally working with the groups that have been identified to work together to identify those threats, to work together on the solutions and the policies that come out of those discussions, and, you know, kind of just pitching more public processes, I suppose. I also see a chat, so let me look. Thank you for the chat support from Casey is wonderful. Thank you so much, bud. Okay, so that's 5651. I also wanted to mention another difference between the two bills is in the definitions. So if you're familiar with the Healthy Environment for All Act, or the HEAL Act, which I believe passed in 2019. That bill was like our first EJ law in Washington state, and it was the first definition of EJ that got codified in our state. And the difference, and so, you know, subsequently, as many bills have passed and as environmental justice has begun to become much more of like a legislatively used terminology, the definition, of course, of that term continues to be debated. So 1181 ended up changing the definition of environmental justice. They did not adopt the HEAL definition. The change that they made was, I believe, HEAL says something to the effect of eliminating harm. So they used the word eliminate. 1181, and I think some of the opposition that was pushing against that bill felt like that was too strong of language. And so they ended up convincing folks to change it. I can't remember off the top of my head what they changed it to. It might have been like minimize or reduce, something that was like less than the line of like eliminate fully. So that, again, just throwing that out as like another difference between our two bills and just in general how 1181 has kind of impacted the rest of environmental justice work in our state. And I see another chat. Nice. Oh, with the HEAL Act. Oh, Casey's on the ball today. Love it.
I have a quick question for you. So that was eliminate was too strong, made him feel uncomfortable, didn't take it out. But I guess I'm wondering, I don't know if it's going too nitty-gritty, but you know, that's why we're here. So did they maybe not use that? Did they kind of try to at least tiptoe around that word and like kind of like, you don't have to, maybe they didn't want to say eliminate, but did they encourage, you know, looking back into the history of the issue and identifying the barriers? I mean, it sounds like, I mean, I don't know, maybe I missed something too. I guess I'm just wondering if you feel okay with the way that they where they landed with it, and what your opinion is of that. I mean, obviously it's not enough, but
yeah.
Yeah, how well did they do?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I mean, I think our preference is that it's really hard when you have a new like a terminology that then starts having different definitions. It just becomes complicated, right? So for the sake of alignment and the ease of understanding, so that people, like, if I read the HEAL Act and I read one definition and that's now my definition of EJ, you know, you kind of want to go at like be able to assume that the next bill that you read that mentions EJ is going to be the same definition. So someone was just like the efficiency and the alignment across legislation. But, you know, it's not uncommon for those changes to be made. So it wasn't like surprising that they didn't fully adopt the HEAL definition. It just, of course, was like slightly like, damn, we wish you would have just stuck with that because that's the definition that we want. In regards to like the quality of the change that they made, I don't think it was a super terrible change or anything. I think it just like, in our minds, from our point of view, I think the environmental justice is trying to eliminate harm. And the feedback I think we were hearing was like, well, does that create liability? What does eliminating mean? Is that even feasible? Is it realistic? And I think those are definitely questions that we often get about like that word eliminate. But yeah, that's what we mean. We want like, that is our goal, is to eliminate harm. We want a better world where harm is truly minimized. It is like the lowest, it's the smallest amount of harm that we can cause. So, or that is tolerable, because yeah, I mean, harm is a part of life, maybe, like there's an argument there. And in the transition from the society we have now to a lot of the vision of society that we have in the future takes time, and that can be slow. So I don't think it was a all out bad choice of a change. And like I said, I can't remember the exact word that they replaced eliminate with. It just is different. And you know, we were pushing for like having that alignment for the sake of everyone, you know?
Yeah.
So yeah.
No, thank you. I mean, because it's, yeah, I'm with you on that, because it, you can say the easier words, and that kind of gives a little bit of leeway, a little bit of less direction. Because when you use a word like eliminate, it's clear what that word means.
Yeah,
It's clear, and yes,
exactly.
it sounds big, it sounds maybe unattainable, but at least that's what we should be working towards. So
Yeah,
anyways,
exactly. That's a really great way to put it, of like, eliminate is exactly what we're working towards. So yeah, the
okay.
little bit of the terminology stuff there. Okay, earlier I mentioned that in 2022 we pushed for climate in the GMA to be added, but we weren't quite successful in that. And I mentioned that instead the legislature had directed the Department of Commerce to develop some guidance for climate in and for the benefit of jurisdictions and communities. The way that Front Centered became involved in that was that the Department of Commerce reached out, and they had requested that we gather some of our members and work together essentially for a year with the department to develop this guidance. And so that's what we did. We had a group of 7 of our members, plus myself and several other Front Centered staff members, who met monthly. We conducted like several different forms of outreach. Each of the organizations that were part of this group, like I said, there were 7 of them. They each did outreach. So they did surveys, they held community conversations, they integrated quite a bit of this work into their existing like strategic plans. There was a lot of community discussion that we did over the course of the year through that project. And the outcome of that was a criteria matrix that planners and community members can utilize together, as well as a report that is listed as Appendix A of Commerce's like total guidance for comp planning and climate. Yeah, yes, for 1181. So yeah, we worked on this for like a year. Some of the things that we heard through that outreach was like really needing like just a lack of familiarity with comp planning, which led us to think like, okay, so this means like community-based organizations really need to be a bigger part of comp planning, and really being able to draw the lines between like the experts who can really write these plans and who have like studied a lot to do so, probably several of you or folks that are in this organization. But we also like need community-based orgs who are like experts in community, right? So all the experts need to be able to work together. So that was one of the lessons. They also heard quite a bit about just obstacles. And I think this comes up often with public engagement, right? Of like the details of like the location. Is it accessible? Like physically and just like time wise, is it accessible? Do people or the communities or the audience that you expect to attend, are they working at the time of the meeting, or do they need a virtual option? Is childcare an obstacle? Do people need to be fed? So on and so forth. All of the like different logistics planning things. We heard that a lot throughout the outreach of like, yeah, I have a life and you want me to now step into like a civic engagement space and like lean into community for this comp planning. I don't know what that is, and I don't know how to participate. So we just heard a lot of like inaccessibility through this outreach. But alternatively, we heard, let me skip that. We heard so much interest. There were so many people who were like, wow, because we did quite a bit of education of like, here's the history of comprehensive planning, here's the history of the Growth Management Act in our state, and here's how it might be able to like impact you in your daily life. So there was significant like interest once we were able to kind of break it down and do that educational piece, but there was still just those like kind of the age-old thing of like, well, how much can we trust planners? How much do we like trust agency folks to do these plans? And these are folks that are like not quite our trusted messengers. So how can we like build better relationships with them and like not just have a one-time meeting and then never hear anything again? So I just really wanted to point out these recommendations from the community leaders and from those 7 organizations and their communities who did spend such a long time talking about this, that equity is definitely something people are interested in. People are really excited about growth management stuff, but they just need like a little bit more, I think, support to be able to engage. And I think that's a pretty common thing we hear. And it's super attached to like, well, where does the money come from and the time and the staff to do all of those things? So it's not just a one story fits all type of thing. Which also brings me to this first point of like, when we are talking about equity with that group, a lot of what we heard was like, there's no one way to decide if something's equitable because the community that it applies to is so different from a community that they might just be next door to. So something that happens in one county just might not be applicable to something that happens in another county. And how do you figure out what is equitable for both of those things? It's just hard to make a recommendation that would fit both, right? So lots of customization, which again, we also toiled a lot with like how much time and capacity that customization takes, especially in context of like the climate crisis, which can oftentimes make people feel really urgent, right? Feels like there's just never enough time to stop the climate crisis. And yet we're demanding more time for this educational work and for bringing everyone along together. So that was like a hard piece, and definitely still something that we're exploring today. The other piece I want to go back for was that criteria matrix that I did mention. So while we determined that it was hard to make recommendations or like firm stances on like how can growth management work be equitable, we did want to develop something, a tool that we could use in the futures and going forward. So I won't go through this whole thing. It is also this whole matrix and everything that I've kind of talked about with this related to the Climate Uplift Project is all in that report that I mentioned earlier. So you can definitely read this again and make use of this tool. But there are 4 parts, and it's just like these couple questions that kind of aim to help the people like answering the questions consider the measure or the policy or whatever is being put forth. So the timing that this would kind of come out could be applied to a public process, but it's more for that step of like, okay, we have identified the issues, we've identified some ideas or drafted some solutions or policies that we think will further these goals, and this tool can now kind of be a helpful look back of like, okay, but like, let's check this out. Does it properly put forth like accountability measures? Do we properly know who's going to benefit from this? Are we leaving people out? It's kind of a tool to help prevent unintended harm, if that makes sense. And the scale that we've recommended is like low to high, meaning like does this have a low potential for equity, or does this have a high potential for equity, or are we somewhere in between? And based on that, how might we be able to like push that more to the right? How might we be able to make this a little bit more equitable? So I will say they're kind of like sometimes hard questions to answer, hard questions to grapple with, especially if you've never grappled with them before. If you are interested in talking about it or learning more about the matrix, or if you and your organization or your team try it out and have feedback, feel free to reach out to me. I would love to hear how people are making use of it and if it is a supportive tool. So that is part of the report. And I think that's all from me, folks. This is my contact information, my email. I can put it in the chat as well so that y'all have it. But like I said, if you have questions or comments or feedback that you want to share about the report, or like especially questions or clarity of like how to like best make use of anything that I've said today, please feel free to reach out. I would love to like support that. My goal is to like support community and getting them engaged and stuff into the growth management work, because it really is a great advocacy pathway for folks to get involved civically, and vice versa for planners to like improve their work as well and always be able to get better. So always happy to have dialogue. Let me stop sharing. Yeah. And I'm happy to answer questions or whatever.
Great. Thank you so much, Sierra. That was great. Very good presentation. So where do we find the matrix? Jay would like.
Okay, the matrix itself is in that report, which I can pull up the link to in a moment. And it's in like Appendix A, I believe is what it's called. But let me grab the link for that and then I can chat it.
Okay, great. Thanks for asking about that, Jay. And then Tamara, are you back? Okay, great. Do you want me to read your question, or did you want to ask it verbally since you're back? You're kind of cutting out. We can't really hear you. I'll just read it for now since we can't hear you. But feel free to tune in too. So were low impact techniques included in the updated recommendations, and are there plans to find ways to incentivize LID techniques?
I'm not entirely sure if low impact techniques were like prioritized or included. The materials that the Department of Commerce gave to us was like, I think it was like it was like an Excel sheet with like 300 measures in it that they wanted us to go through and like rank on a scale of like equitable, like what is more or less equitable for them. And there was just like no way for us to go through, like we did end up going through all the measures, but it took us a really long time. And my understanding is that they like solicited, the Department of Commerce like solicited all these measures and ideas from like different jurisdictions, different experts, I think different like jurisdictions and planners. So they may have included low impact techniques, but to be honest with you, that was never something that was like brought to our attention. So it could have been included for sure. I'm just not sure.
Do we have any other questions? People want to come off of mute and ask a question at all? Just feel free to do that if you'd like. Thanks for putting that report in there.
Absolutely.
And everything that we've put in the chat is gonna also be sent out in the follow-up email as well. So you'll know.
Great. I'll also link, I just chatted the link to like the full guidance. If you just scroll down on the page, it has a link to all of the stuff. And it's also great. We had requested that the Department of Commerce provide what is that thing called? Executive summary of the guidance in like a multitude of different languages. So if you work with an organization or a community that is like multilingual or has those needs, that is also in there if you would like to share it. So that was a cool win for us.
Awesome. Serena, did you have a question?
I don't.
Okay, sorry, I thought you came off mute.
Oh.
Yeah, so I have a quick question for you. I guess, so you guys have a great network. Sierra, it sounds like you guys have a great network and work all over the state, have, good relationships with some legislators and that sort of thing. What are some partnerships or links that you would like to make that you haven't quite been able to, get everybody in the same room or on the same page, but you would like to? Yes.
Yeah, that's a good question. So we have like kind of, I want to say 4 to 5 kind of pillars at Front Center, like topics that we really pursue very heavily. So that being transportation, energy, local pollution, and then co-governance and like government accountability. So like pretty much 4. And then generally we have like a whole side of our org that does capacity and power building. So those are like, I mentioned that because those are like our main 4, right? The topics that we do a ton of work in. Land use typically gets kind of pulled into transportation often. But then we have all these topics that people are working on of like food justice, housing affordability is a big one that people are talking on. Migration, which to us includes like refugee and immigrant work. Abolition. There's all these topics that of like social justice work that is happening around the state and that our members are really driving, honestly, that work in and developing, but they're not things that fully get land in one of our big 4 topic areas. So I would say any of those tangential ones, so like the housing stuff in particular. Actually, next week we have our coalition, we have an annual event, a mid-year check-in that we have. And each year we have the members vote for breakout rooms of just topics where they're like, hey, I do work, I'm interested in this, and I just want to like talk to other members. I live in Tacoma, I want to talk to someone in Spokane about the same topic so that we can kind of find some solidarity. And one of the like #1 voted topics was housing. So I will say it's a big topic in the coalition that Front and Centered hasn't quite like completely carved space out yet on like the organization level for like full legislative things, but it's something that our members are thinking about a ton. It's something that their communities are asking them about a ton. So I do think there's a lot of excitement around it. And a lot of it is like transit oriented development. That was a big thing this year for us, as well as the just generally housing affordability and who determines what affordability is, and like how resources can be circulated to better like connect community members, like individual residents to those resources for housing affordability. That one in particular comes up quite a bit. So
Yeah, I'm not surprised. Not just because I work in housing, obviously, but I think it's hard to deny that we're in a housing crisis now. Everybody can feel it and see it, but yeah, it's cool to see the intersection of these conversations happening, and just know that we're here to add anything to those conversations if you need us to. So,
thank you.
Crystal's got your hand raised.
Crystal.
Yes, I'm here.
Hi,
Yeah,
buddy.
so can you guys see me properly? Okay,
Yep.
there we go.
Nice and sunny.
Yeah, I just wanted to put my little 2 cents in. But so I'm with Empower Movement, and Empower Movement has worked with Front and Centered, and just kind of because you guys were asking like what exactly they do and everything. But so I'm a wheelchair user, and I live in a low income community over here. I'm outside just chilling. But so with Empower Movement, we are a group of people with all kinds of disabilities, whether you're a wheelchair user, blind, deaf, whatever. But all of us are people of color with disabilities. And so like we're all, in our opinions, we're all impacted in a different way, because of the fact that we're minority people with disabilities. And so we partnered with Front and Centered in that way. And my specific thing, I was talking to them about the HEAL Act. And so I'm here, like I said, I love being in the sun right here. This is my spot because the sun just shines right here. So I just be on my meetings right here in my apartment complex. But I'm a wheelchair user, but I also suffer from what they call minor hallucinations. And that's like basically due to air pollution. So when it gets like real cloudy, like if anybody passes by me and they're like smoking or anything, all my neighbors, they're all super cool. But like if they're smoking and stuff, then they all just like go walking around me so so the smoke doesn't come by me and everything, because they know that's going to cause me to hallucinate. So if there's too much smoke around me, then I literally have to stay inside my house and I can't come out. And I'm sure Sierra knows this or whatever, like right down the street from where I live, the city's trying to do like a factory. They're trying to build a factory over there. So on South Tacoma Way. And that's going to impact me as a minority person with a disability. I'm not going to be able to come out here and chill like this, but it impacts our, environments in that way. But that's why we kind of partnered, like it's those reasons, but that's why me specifically, I was working on the HEAL Act with them. But just to give you guys an example.
Thanks, Crystal. That's so nice. And it's great to see you. Oh my gosh, I haven't seen you since like November.
Yeah.
I didn't know if you realized I was on here or not.
Thank you so much, Crystal. Yeah, it's important to remember, you guys, that that this is it. The Frontline community conversation is a conversation because it has been intentional. It has been intentionally it's been intentionally zoned, intentionally developed, development and other undesirable things in the community, like big warehouses or landfills. Those sorts of things have been placed on purpose next to frontline communities, communities of color, lower income communities. And that's why this conversation is so important. It's not, it's equity, but it's also just, it makes sense, and it's just mean. And so this work just makes sense. And I get really fired up about it because it's just mean. But that's just kind of the nature of zoning and the history of zoning and redlining and all of those things that, you know, it's part of the housing conversation. It's part of the development conversation, climate conversation, health. I mean, all of it is directly, it's all in the same bubble. So I appreciate Crystal giving your you know, your 2 cents and your experience, and I thank you for that time. Jay?
I live in Gig Harbor, and as most people who live in Pierce County know, Gig Harbor is full of people who are way behind in the times on a lot of things. And I am pushing for equity out here and otherwise. Would sharing this study and working on getting more communication on equity and climate change, do you feel using the study and sharing it with council members and things would push towards that and help push towards that?
I mean, I think so. I can't say I'm totally familiar with like the community and what would persuade them or the council or whomever you might want to share it with. But I do think it's a report that we developed over a year with the State Department. Like I said, a ton of community engagement went into it. Like if I had to estimate, it's nowhere under 1,000 people that we spoke to. And the organizations that were engaged, they're included in that report, like they're named, but I can say they were like Tacoma residents or Tacoma-based organizations. We had Colville Reservation organizations, Spokane, Yakima. I believe we had Bremerton and Bellingham. Like we were all across the state was really pretty well represented, I would say, both in the urban context and rural context. We tried to do a really good job of just having a lot of diversity of folks engaged in that project. So I do think it is a well put together report that would hopefully be persuasive to whoever read it, of like the necessity and the harm, the necessity of equity and the harm that comes from every day that we don't continue to center it. So hopefully it would be would be a persuasive tool. That is my hope, but I can't say like a guarantee. But if you're asking if I think it would be helpful, yes, I do think it would be a helpful tool.
And the other part of it is, do you have other tools that you would suggest if I were to put like a packet of things together with this report that would help give a whole picture, so that I'm pushing for like a resource center in Gig Harbor and climate and equity. And it is, like I said, very behind in the times. So pushing for these things here, it can be very frustrating. And so if I can give them a whole block of information and a bunch of tools, then hopefully it will persuade them more.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, I think I can share a link to like our website, which has a ton of like other reports and tools that we've put together. And then maybe like that might help you go through and see which you think would be best. We have a great kind of report on like the HEAL Act and how that has been going. We also have like tools like the Environmental Health Disparities Act, or not Act, the Environmental Health Disparities Map, which I'm not sure, Casey, if y'all have like talked about that in this space.
I don't
Oh, okay.
not necessarily. I don't think at least if it's been mentioned, it hasn't been mentioned in depth.
Oh, okay. Well, let me tell you about this great tool, y'all. So there's this environmental health disparities map, which actually came from one of our staff members, Dr. Esther Min, who is also a professor at the University of Washington. She created this map when she was a student. I believe it was like her thesis of her grad program. And then since then, the Department of Health has adopted the map, excuse me. And what the environmental health disparities map does is it visually displays like how polluted or at threat a particular community is. So the whole state is mapped. They are doing updates to it within the next year. This is the third update. So it is, there definitely has been like feedback of like what data gets included and how to make it better. But I think that's a great tool to show on a scale of like 1 to 10, how much of a threat or how impacted are you by the climate crisis? And so I would definitely include that one, Jay. That's definitely a good tool because you can click on like Gig Harbor and you can say, well, look, maybe we're like a 3, like we're not, maybe we have some pollution, but it's not like we have some pollution, but we're on the low end of it. And then you can click on like Tacoma or a part like South Tacoma, which is predominantly BIPOC and like Crystal identified is particularly being targeted for polluting entities at the moment. You can show like they're ranking at like a 10 on this map. So they're facing high like threats and potential for like harm from the climate crisis. So that's a great tool to explore, I would say. I would definitely start there. That's a good way to like visually show people like, look, here are the demographics here where people who have not been particularly targeted by the systems that we live under, and their community is a little bit healthier in the environment versus this community that is like a frontline community, is targeted a lot, is already going through so much, and they're ranking a 10, you know? So that would be a good tool to start with, I think.
Thank you.
Thank you. Perfect. Yeah, the interesting thing about Gig Harbor that I've heard recently in I think it was a comp plan neighborhood kind of workshop thingy, talking about, comp planning and housing and development and stuff in Gig Harbor. And something interesting that somebody brought up was Gig Harbor has a lot of seniors. And that's the big demographic in that's one of the big demographics in the Gig Harbor area that are I guess at risk for that area. And I think that when it was kind of explained in terms of seniors and also related to the other conversations of frontline communities and communities of color and, low income communities and stuff like that. I think that when people heard it explained in terms of seniors, it almost made them kind of like, oh, well, that's important, but it's the same thing, trying to keep people in a safe and healthy environment to live and being able, if they want to, live there as long as they want to, throughout different stages of life. And so those kind of conversations, it was really interesting seeing that kind of like, oh, moment, and some people that were like really opposed to all of this new housing density requirements from Commerce. And yeah, I just wanted to throw that out there as just one of the very interesting things that I've heard coming out of Gig Harbor conversations. So I don't know if that's something that we focus on, Jay, or not, but people seem to be at least receptive to framing it in that sense and then relating it to other more at-risk communities. Crystal, go ahead.
Hey, just in terms of what you were just saying, so I didn't mention it earlier, but I also personally just do ableism training. I don't even know if you knew that, Sierra, either, but I started doing that back in November. And in terms of what you were saying, from the studies that I've done, so people of color tend to like, when it comes to seniors, they tend to keep their parents, their grandparents, and just like the elderly in their home and everything, and take care of them at home. That's just our culture. That's the way that we are. Like, I know with me, my mom passed away. We tried putting her in a home. She lasted in the home for like 2 days before she was like cussing us out. And like, we're like, okay, we're gonna go get sugar. And even, this is just my own personal story, even me as a person with a disability, I was the one out of all my brothers and sisters to be responsible to take care of her until she passed. And it was just because I was the only one without a job, you know, so it was just automatically burdened on me. And that's just our culture, you know, the way that we are. So the majority of people that are in like nursing homes and things like that, that are kind of easily calculated, for lack of a better term, you know, like in statistics and everything, are like the Caucasian community, you know. So more than likely the statistics that people are seeing are not having the BIPOC community included because they're automatically staying in their home. Does that make sense? You know, so I just wanted to put that in there just from the training that I do and everything. But so in my mind, there are like other people of color and everything out there, but they're just not being people of color and disabilities out there, but they're just not being calculated. And you know, and then even what I do in my training too, like even to have somebody say that they do have a disability, a lot of people aren't even going to admit that they have a disability in those statistics. You know, they don't want to admit it. So just had to put that out there. So.
Thank you for that. And those ableism trainings sound really, really interesting. I just sent you a personal message, but if you're willing to let me put your contact or something info, Crystal, I would love to include that
For
in the
sure.
follow-up. Yeah, if you want to put that in if you want me to use the same email that you registered for this event for, I can do all of it. But if you want to put it in the chat, if you have a different one, that'd be great. And
I'll put my business email in the chat right now.
Perfect. Yep. Awesome. Thank you so much. Yeah, I mean, the conversation goes so deep, and the conversation of, you know, let's do this plan or let's focus on this or this legislation. I think one of the most important questions to ask is who is in the room and who's not in the room. And having information like that, Crystal, I've never even thought about that, you know, just the cultural beings of you know, family dynamics and family norms and that sort of thing not being counted in these surveys and not being counted in these you know, reports and things that are trying to give light to those communities and those people. So thank you for that. And I think that everybody should take your ableism training. Jay?
I appreciate that, Crystal. I'm disabled and I live in the only low-income housing in Gig Harbor, and I'm a mom who raised 2 kids out here. So I am everything that demographic gets about when you hear about Gig Harbor and its retiree community. Out here, they don't really have a lot of culture, and the culture that is here is well hidden, and we're working on trying to bring out more opportunities for the people that are here that have familial culture, the Hispanic community, the BIPOC community. And it's hard when you have a small town that is built on tourism that has a really hard mindset, and that's what I'm dealing with out here. But I appreciate everything that you said, and I understand completely because I'm part of that demographic at the bottom of the road, not the top, and trying to bring awareness into a community that is predominantly marketing itself as a retirement community for rich white people. It's difficult in 1,000 ways. Thank you for all the work you do.
Thanks for the conversation, everybody. This is great. Yeah, we're talking about climate. We're talking about so many things in this conversation. Does anybody else have any questions or comments or anything? Well, with that, we're gonna end our session for today, but I just want you guys to continue to, you know, engage with these topics. Obviously, they're important. Obviously, we are here because we think that they're important. But it takes all of us kind of coming together from our different perspectives, backgrounds, professional interests, whatever sector you may be interested in or working in. There's an intersection for everything, and I appreciate everybody kind of coming together. As small of a group as we have today, we've had great conversation, and I think little smaller groups gives more space for people to have discussion. So I think it went well, and I appreciate you guys for being here. We're gonna have more lunch and learns throughout the year, kind of dedicated to planning, to equity, to any intersection between housing and everything else. So hope you'll keep tuning in. Sierra, thank you so much for being here and the work that you do. You guys are in a really unique space and doing really great work across the state. And I know that we'll be interacting more as we go forward. You know, the consortium's always here to support you guys in your housing quests and questions and advocacy. So we're here for you.
Great. Thank you all so much for inviting me. This was great. Thank you for everything.
Perfect. All right, you guys, if you've got space to go enjoy the sunshine, go do it. I'm gonna do that and then come back for that comp planning workshop later. Hope you guys have a good rest of your day. Feel free to email me if you have any questions. Everything that's been put in the chat, all of the conversations, all the links are going to be sent to you in a follow-up email. So we'll see you guys next time. Thanks, Sierra. Thanks, Crystal. Thanks, Jay, everybody.